The Australian outback is a place like no other. The red dirt stretches as far as the eye can see, and the horizon seems to melt into the endless blue sky. The air is dry, and the only sounds are the wind blowing across the vast land, the occasional call of a bird, and the faint rustle of leaves from the few trees scattered across the barren plains. It's a land of isolation, mystery, and sometimes fear. I remember the day I first heard about the Yowie. Growing up in Australia, the legends were always around. People talked about strange sightings, odd footprints, and eerie howls heard in the dead of night. But like most, I shrugged it off as just stories, the kind passed down to entertain or scare children. That changed one afternoon when I saw something I'll never forget. It was during a camping trip in the outback, far from the lights and noise of the city. I had gone with a few friends, but we had split up for the day to explore the surrounding area. The heat was intense, the sun beating down relentlessly as I wandered along a dry creek bed, keeping an eye out for any sign of wildlife. I had always been fascinated by nature, particularly the unique animals of Australia. As I walked, something caught my attention. It was a strange sensation, the feeling that I wasn't alone. I stopped, listening closely, but all I could hear was the wind. Still, the uneasy feeling lingered. I glanced around, scanning the area, but nothing seemed out of place. Yet the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I kept walking, trying to shake off the feeling. That's when I saw it. In the distance, near the edge of a clump of trees, something large and dark moved. At first, I thought it was a kangaroo, but it was too tall, too bulky. I froze, squinting to get a better look, but the figure disappeared into the shadows of the trees. Curiosity got the better of me, and I slowly made my way toward where I had seen the movement. The closer I got, the more I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. My steps became cautious, and my heart raced in my chest. It wasn't just fear of the unknown, it was a primal fear, the kind that tells you to turn back. When I reached the trees, I saw them. Footprints. The shape was odd, like a human foot but wider, the toes longer and spread apart. The prints were deep, as if whatever made them weighed more than anything I had ever encountered. My pulse quickened. This was no ordinary animal. Suddenly, I heard a low growl, deep and rumbling, like the earth itself was groaning. I realized the sound was coming from behind me. I turned slowly, and there, standing at the edge of the trees, was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. It was tall, easily over 7 feet, with broad shoulders and a thick body covered in matted dark fur. Its face was ape-like, but more human, with deep-set eyes that stared at me with an almost curious expression. The creature stood still, watching me, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. I couldn't move. Fear had rooted me to the spot. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing. This was a Yowie. There was no other explanation. The stories were real. The creature existed, and it was standing right in front of me. The Yowie didn't move toward me. It didn't snarl or show aggression. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, as if studying me. The silence between us was deafening, broken only by the sound of my ragged breathing. I didn't know what to do. Run? Stay still? My body refused to cooperate with my frantic thoughts. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the Yowie turned and walked back into the trees, its massive form disappearing into the shadows once more. I stood there, stunned, my legs trembling beneath me. For a long time I couldn't move, replaying the encounter over and over in my head. When I finally managed to gather my wits, I turned and hurried back to camp, not daring to look back. My heart was pounding, and I could still feel the creature's gaze on me, even though I knew it was long gone. Back at camp, I told my friends what had happened, but they didn't believe me. They laughed it off, saying it was probably just my imagination, or maybe I had seen a large kangaroo in the heat of the day. but I knew what I had seen. The footprints, the sheer size of the creature, there was no mistaking it. I had encountered a Yowie. Some say the Yowie is a guardian of the land, a spirit that watches over the outback and its creatures. Others believe it's a relic from a time long past, a being that has managed to survive in the most remote and desolate places. Whatever it is, the Yowie is real, and it's out there, somewhere, hidden in the vastness of the Australian wilderness. When I first saw it, I was just a child, standing by the river, the wind tugging at my hair, the smell of rain in the air. It came from the clouds, hidden at first, like a shadow behind the gray mist. I had heard the elders speak of it before. The Thunderbird, the one who rules the skies and brings the storm. But hearing stories around the fire and seeing the creature in the flesh were two very different things. The clouds above darkened, swirling as if the sky itself was angry. Then, a crack of thunder shook the air so hard it made my bones rattle. The river rippled, uneasy, and the trees bent low. I looked up and saw it, massive wings cutting through the storm. Its wings were spread wide, their tips reaching across the sky, and with each beat, the wind roared. Its feathers were black, darker than the night, but in the light of the storm, they shimmered with blue and white, like lightning dancing through the sky. The Thunderbird was not just any bird. It was a force, something more than flesh and bone. As it soared, its eyes blazed like two suns, and its beak crackled with electricity. When its wings moved, thunder followed, echoing across the land. Every beat seemed to tear through the clouds, each flap a command that the heavens must obey. In the stories, the Thunderbird was said to keep the balance between the upper world, the sky, and the underworld, where creatures like the great horned serpent slithered beneath the waters. They said the Thunderbird's greatest enemy was the underwater panther, a creature of darkness that ruled the deep, hidden rivers and lakes. And when the two clashed, the sky would be torn apart by lightning, and the earth would shake under the power of their battle. That day, I could feel the battle coming. The air was heavy, thick with tension. The river before me grew restless, its once calm waters churning like something below was rising to the surface. I stepped back, my feet sinking into the muddy bank, and I felt it, an unearthly presence moving beneath the surface of the water. Suddenly, a giant shape broke through the river's surface. A flash of scales, a pair of glowing eyes, and horns that twisted up like the roots of an ancient tree. It was the great horned serpent, its body slick with water, dark as the night, winding through the river like it owned the place. Its scales shimmered in strange, oily colors, reflecting the stormy sky. When it opened its mouth, steam rose from the water, and its teeth glinted, sharp and deadly. The sky above answered. The Thunderbird circled once, then dove down, its wings beating with such force that the trees bent further, nearly touching the ground. Lightning burst from its talons, shooting towards the serpent, illuminating the world in blinding white. The clash was as fierce as the stories had said. The river seemed to boil under the serpent's wrath, while the Thunderbird's strikes filled the air with the smell of ozone, each bolt of lightning splitting the sky. The two creatures were ancient enemies, and the ground trembled beneath their power. The Thunderbird attacked from the skies, the keeper of the winds and storms, while the serpent fought from below, master of the waters and the dark. It was as though the elements themselves were at war, wind and rain against water and shadows. For a moment, I wondered if the world itself could survive such a fight. The storm raged on, each gust of wind stronger than the last, and the river seemed to rise higher, threatening to spill over its banks. I could feel the power of both creatures, a balance so delicate that even the smallest shift could tip everything into chaos. And then, the fight ended. The Thunderbird let out a cry, a sound so loud it felt like it could shatter the sky itself. With one final strike of lightning, it sent the serpent crashing back into the depths of the river. The water exploded upwards, a shower of spray and mist, and then it was still. The storm began to calm. The clouds, once thick and angry, started to drift away, and the wind, once howling, turned into a gentle breeze. The river, now clear and smooth, flowed once more, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. The Thunderbird, its task complete, soared back up into the sky. It circled once more, its dark wings stretching across the fading storm, and then disappeared into the clouds, leaving only a distant rumble of thunder in its wake. I stood there for a long time, staring at the place where it had vanished, trying to understand what I had just witnessed. Even now, whenever a storm rolls in, and I hear the first crack of thunder, I can't help but look up. I wait, just for a moment, to see if I can catch a glimpse of those mighty wings, those eyes that burn like fire, the guardian of the skies watching over us all. And I remember that somewhere beneath the calm waters, the great horned serpent waits too for the next storm, the next battle, the next balance. Growing up, I always enjoyed hearing stories about strange creatures living deep in lakes, but I never took them seriously. I figured they were just tall tales, made up to give people a thrill. That all changed one summer afternoon when I had my own strange encounter at Lake Simco. It was a warm day, and I had decided to take a solo boat trip on the lake. The sky was clear, and the water looked inviting. I rented a small motorboat from a local shop and headed out, the hum of the engine mixing with the soft sounds of water splashing against the boat's hull. I had no particular destination in mind, just the open lake in front of me. Lake Simco is a place I've always found peaceful. With its wide, calm waters and distant, tree-lined shores, it's the kind of place where you can lose yourself in thought. As I drifted further away from the shore, the boat slowing to a gentle glide, I felt that familiar sense of calm washing over me. But something else was about to wash over me that I'd never forget. I was about an hour into my trip when I noticed the water ahead rippling in a strange way. At first, I thought it was just a school of fish or the wind playing tricks on the surface. But as I got closer, the ripples grew larger, and I could see a dark shadow moving beneath the water. My heart skipped a beat. It was unlike anything I had seen before. Too large to be a fish, too slow-moving to be anything I could recognize. I cut the engine, and the boat came to a halt, leaving me drifting in silence. For a moment, everything was still. Then, without warning, the water ahead of me exploded into a flurry of bubbles and movement. I gripped the sides of the boat, my knuckles turning white as I watched in disbelief. Rising slowly out of the water, something massive broke the surface. At first, all I could see were two long antennae-like appendages sticking up from the water like giant reeds. They swayed gently, as if tasting the air. My pulse quickened, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Whatever this was, it wasn't a fish or a boat. It was something else. As more of the creature emerged, I could make out its strange, octopus-like arms. 4 of them, thick and curling, reached out from the water, moving with an eerie grace. They were covered in what looked like smooth, leathery skin, glistening in the sunlight. The creature's body was large, but not like any animal I'd seen before. It had an odd, segmented look to it, like it was made up of different parts stitched together in some impossible way. I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't a fish. It wasn't a boat. It wasn't anything I could explain. It was the igogo, the creature of legend that I had heard about but never believed could be real. The creature had 3 pairs of legs, all equally bizarre and covered in rough, bumpy skin. They didn't move much, just hung there beneath the surface, swaying slightly with the water's movement. But what really caught my eye were the 6 gill-like appendages near the creature's head. They flared out like feathers, delicate yet otherworldly, as if they were filtering the air or sensing the water around them. I was frozen in place, unable to move or think clearly. I had never seen anything so strange, so alien. The creature didn't seem aggressive. It wasn't coming toward me, nor did it make any noise. It simply floated there, half submerged, its long antennae twitching every so often. I wondered if it had even noticed me, or if it was too preoccupied with whatever mysterious task had brought it to the surface. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. My eyes stayed glued to the creature as it continued to hover just above the waterline. The igogo began to sink back into the depths. Its antennae were the last to disappear, vanishing beneath the surface with hardly a ripple to mark its passage. The lake returned to its calm state, the only sign of the encounter being the quickening beat of my heart. I sat there in stunned silence, gripping the sides of the boat, unable to fully process what I had just witnessed. My mind raced with questions. What was the creature doing? Why had it surfaced? And most importantly, how many other times had it come up from the depths without anyone knowing? The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the water. I finally restarted the engine, the sound of the motor breaking the stillness. As I steered the boat back toward shore, my hands trembling slightly on the controls, I couldn't stop glancing back at the spot where the igogo had emerged. The water was calm again, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But I knew better. Back on land, I tried to explain what I had seen to a few locals, but most of them just smiled and nodded. Some offered friendly advice about not spending too much time alone on the lake, while others told me that everyone sees strange things out there every now and then. But I knew this was different. This wasn't just my imagination or a trick of the light. The igogo was real. I haven't been back to Lake Simco since that day. Part of me is curious, wondering if I might ever see the creature again, but another part of me is content with that single, unforgettable encounter. The igogo is a mystery, and perhaps it's better left that way. Something strange and wonderful lurking beneath the waters, hidden from view. Growing up in the mountains, surrounded by trees and wildlife, I was used to hearing stories of strange things. My parents, both rangers in Yosemite, would tell me about the legends whispered around the campfires by visitors. Some spoke of elusive creatures hiding in the forests, but I never gave them much thought. Nature had its mysteries, but I believed they were just that. Mysteries, not something anyone could really witness. It was an early autumn morning when it happened. I had decided to take a hike through one of the less traveled trails, hoping to enjoy the quiet and maybe spot some deer or even a bear if I was lucky. The sun was barely up and everything had a golden glow. I loved the solitude of being out in the woods, far from people, with only the birds and squirrels for company. It was peaceful, and I felt completely at ease. But that peace didn't last long. I had been hiking for about an hour when I noticed something odd. The usual sounds of the forest had gone quiet. Just silence. My footsteps seemed unnaturally loud now, and I slowed down, feeling uneasy. It wasn't fear exactly, more like a strange sense that something wasn't right. I kept walking, though, thinking it was just a shift in the wind or perhaps some predator nearby causing the animals to hide. But then, I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but as I moved closer, I realized that it wasn't a shadow at all. About 30 yards ahead, standing near the edge, was a massive figure. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. I would guess at least 8 or 9 feet. Its body was blending perfectly with the bark of the trees around it. It was too upright, too still. I froze, unsure of what to do. My heart was racing and my mind was scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing. The creature seemed unaware of me at first. It was facing away, looking toward the deeper part of the forest, almost as if it was listening for something. Its broad shoulders rose and fell with slow, steady breaths, and I could see the muscles rippling beneath the fur. Then it moved. It wasn't a sudden movement, not a rush or a leap, but a slow, deliberate step forward. It was almost graceful, despite its size. The ground barely made a sound as it shifted its weight, and I could see the massive footprints it left behind in the soft earth. I stayed completely still, not wanting to draw its attention. I didn't know what this thing was, and I didn't want to find out the hard way. But as it took another step, it stopped and slowly turned its head. That's when it saw me. There was something intelligent in those eyes, something aware. This wasn't just some animal wandering the forest. It was watching me, studying me, almost like it was deciding what to do next. I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs felt like they were rooted to the ground, and my mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts, none of them making any sense. All I could do was stare back, hoping that whatever this creature was, it wouldn't see me as a threat. For what felt like an eternity, we stood there, eyes locked. It didn't growl or make any noise. It just watched. Then slowly, it turned away again, almost as if it had lost interest. It took a few more steps into the forest, its massive form disappearing into the trees, and just like that, it was gone. Eventually, I gathered my strength and forced myself to move. I didn't follow the creature. I didn't want to know where it had gone or if it was still out there watching me. Instead, I turned back and started walking quickly, almost running, down the trail. The hike back to my car felt like it took forever. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the bushes made my heart race, but I never saw the creature again. By the time I reached the trailhead, I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. I sat in my car for a long time, staring out at the trees, wondering what I had just experienced. It started when I moved into the old house on the hill. It had been empty for years, but I liked the solitude. The floors creaked with age, and the walls held the scent of forgotten years. Every window looked out onto the woods, dark and endless. At first, everything was quiet. I spent my days fixing small things, broken doors, leaky windows. The nights were still, though I always felt the weight of silence pressing in, as if something waited just beyond the walls. Sometimes I thought I saw shadows in the corners of my eyes, but when I looked, there was nothing. It was just the house settling, I told myself. But then the noises began. It started small, a soft thump upstairs when I was sitting in the living room. I would rush up to check, but no one was there. The air was always cold up there, no matter how much I turned on the heat. I ignored it, thinking it was just an old house making old sounds. But the thumps grew louder, more frequent. They weren't random anymore. They followed me. When I walked down the hall, they echoed behind me. When I went to bed, they sounded from the room next to mine. One night, I heard something different, the sound of something dragging across the floor. It was slow, deliberate, as if something heavy was being pulled. I froze in bed, listening. The noise came from the attic, a place I hadn't yet explored. The next morning, I found the courage to go up. The stairs to the attic were steep, narrow, and the air grew colder with each step. At the top, the door was swollen shut from years of neglect. It took all my strength to push it open. In the far corner, there were long, deep scratches on the floor. They formed a path, as if something had been dragged from the window to the center of the room. And there, lying in the dust, was a small, tattered book. Its cover was worn, but when I picked it up, I felt a chill run through me. And then, one night, I saw it. It was late. I was lying in bed, my heart racing from the sounds above. I glanced toward the door, and there, standing in the hallway, was a figure. Tall, thin, with long, bony fingers. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. I closed my eyes, hoping it would disappear, but when I opened them, it was closer. Slowly, it moved toward the bed, each step deliberate, its feet dragging across the floor. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in terror. It leaned down, its face inches from mine, though I couldn't see its eyes, only shadows. The cold was unbearable, seeping into my bones, and I felt it reach for me. The next thing I remember is waking up. The house was quiet again. The cold had lifted, and the figure was gone, but the scratches in the attic remained.